here's the question: is Hawaii affected by climate change? So this is from Mark in Santiago, Chile. And Mark, I want to thank you. You've put in a few really good questions over the life of the show, and I appreciate that. And Mark says, I live in a place that's been severely affected by climate change, as we've been in a drought for the best part of 15 years. Is Hawaii experiencing any significant impacts due to climate change that could affect the state in the middle to long term? If so, is the local government taking any steps to alleviate it? Mark, I'm going to hit my favorite topic before I turn over to Heidi to get us rolling. On the government, we can't even keep like a COVID thing under control. So the heck if we're going to do anything about the weather. But Heidi, what have you seen in your years, or what you've heard on Maui? What if anything has changed that they've attributed due to climate change?
Yeah, absolutely. Great question, Mark. I think climate change is affecting all of us, wherever we are. And it is a concern for Maui. Maui County's 2020 budget allocated over $2 million in funds for 4 different studies related to addressing the impacts of sea level rise and climate change, and how this is going to impact infrastructure and communities. So they're looking at possibly long-term needing to move some coastal roads, perhaps relocating one of our wastewater reclamation facilities. And it's also going to impact residential properties and properties that were built very close to the ocean. I mean, 40, 50 years ago, you could build right up on the water's edge. That's not true today. But these properties still do exist that are built right along the ocean. And even though the state of Hawaii owns the beaches, the property owners that own these oceanfront properties share in the stewardship and often the costs in maintaining the shoreline. So it's definitely a consideration.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, Dylan, what's the climate? There's been some serious climate change on the Big Island, but not due to climate change. But anyway, fill us in on the climate change concerns or issues that you know of on the Big Island.
I think in the near term, like in our lifetime, in our kids' lifetime, it really depends on the island. If you're on Kauai or Oahu, where you have a more eroded flat island with lower lying areas, rising sea levels are going to affect those areas more. On the Big Island, we're very steep, and even tsunami inundation zones are very small because the island elevation rises very quickly. And the same is true of Maui in most cases. And so, in the short term, rising sea levels and things like that are not a huge concern for Big Island folks, definitely near the water. But the bigger question is, we go back to the government and what are they doing about it? And that's always a frustration, is regardless of how, what your concerns about climate change are, everybody can agree we need more renewable energy and stop burning fossil fuels. And although we talk about it a lot, there's always a lack of real action or initiative to get those things done. And we got so many natural resources here, geothermal, sun, wind power, where we really shouldn't be getting the bulk of our energy from burning fossil fuels, but we still do that. It's kind of insane. And then you have situations where you have innovative companies that come in and try and do stuff, and then a few people protest it, and then the government supports them or the courts support them, and it gets shut down. So it's that is something that definitely we'd like to see the government take more action on. I don't know if they can change, do anything in the big picture on climate change, but definitely we can do small local stuff like stop burning fossil fuel.
Certainly, fossil fuels I think the mitigation issues are a big deal. Scott, what's the Oahu view on climate change? I've got some stories of my own on Oahu, but I want to hear your point first, Scott.
Yeah, the biggest one I see is Waikiki, where you have the most dense number of condo towers, and if you look at it, the Alawai wraps around behind it. The Alawai Canal, which is fed from the ocean, wraps around behind it. And so as sea level rise happens, Waikiki is probably one of the biggest areas of impact, with a high density, not to mention that's our main tourism hub here on Oahu. So how does sea level rise impact it, and how do you prevent from serious damage happening at some point? I see that as a major concern for the state, because Waikiki alone is a major, one of the most well-known tourist spots here in the state of Hawaii.
Yeah, and the part that's going to be an interesting one on sea level rise. There's been my little story on that is there's a light industrial business district on Oahu called Mapunapuna, and in Mapunapuna I think they're technically below sea level, and when the tides are high, many of the streets are flooded with seawater because of low tides. And during king tides, which is a higher tide, I don't know what the details are about king tides, but the word king means big. So king tide, there's even more flooding. So there's certain parts, and during certain parts of, at the right moment with the right tide, etc., some parts of Mapunapuna are absolutely flooded to the point where you're going to have a hard time driving through it. And I had a friend that one of my first customers, actually, I was just talking to him just the other day, known him for 35 years. And I asked him about over time what has happened to the area, because his business is right next to one of these areas that gets inundated with tide-based flooding. And he said, slowly over the years, it's gotten incrementally worse, which I think is just the natural thing. Now, back to Dylan's point, how much has the government mitigated the issue in Mapunapuna? And I could assure you, nothing has been done at all. It's just, it gets bad, it gets worse. Anyway, hope that answered the question.